The World Food Program USA, or sorry, the UN World Food Program, let me start there, is the world's largest humanitarian organization fighting hunger. It has perhaps the most comprehensive view of hunger resulting from the pandemic of any organization in the world. And my organization, the World Food Program USA, is the 501c3 that supports the mission of the UN World Food Program through advocacy, marketing, and fundraising in the US. So I thought it was just important to set the distinction there. I'm going to share a bit today about the state of global hunger, primarily driven by conflict, climate, and COVID-19. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the solutions needed to address global hunger in the future. So what have we learned from the COVID-19 pandemic? Food systems are not protected or insulated from global health emergencies, but instead are intimately impacted by them. So just to give a bit of perspective, in January 2020, there were about 150 million people who were suffering from acute emergency level hunger across the globe. And that's a number that was up from what it had been a few years prior. There was a bit of an inflection point about 4 years ago on the global hunger trends. They'd been declining for over a decade, which was great news. And then they've tipped back up, largely due to man-made conflict, but also climate. But then COVID-19 comes in on top of all of that. And right now, the World Food Program estimates that the number has grown from 150 million pre-COVID to 270 million people at risk of acute emergency level hunger across the globe. On the domestic side, in the US, we saw the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic shocks, particularly when schools had to close down, and then also when workplaces closed down. You all in the US might remember the lines at the food banks in pretty much every city across the country. School food services folks did a heroic job of adapting the systems to be able to get food in the hands of kids who normally were getting their meals in the school system. But due to the shutdowns and related economic shocks, millions of people lost their livelihoods, whether through unemployment, the loss of income from remittances, slowdowns in the tourism sector, or also impacts on extractive industries. And we're seeing this continue to echo, particularly in countries least able to absorb these shocks. The other thing that COVID-19 emphasized on the global level was urban hunger. We've usually considered chronic hunger to be a phenomenon most common in rural places, but it's not a rural condition. And with the COVID-19, many lower middle income countries were affected by hunger for the first time, including people in the urban centers who were suddenly out of work. Most food-related instability occurs from food price shocks among urbanites, and the likelihood of these events, like I mentioned earlier, greatly increased with COVID-19. Human health and global food security are intimately linked. Early in the pandemic, the World Food Program helped sound the alarm about vaccine effectiveness among malnourished populations. While the global mantra was no one is safe until everyone is vaccinated, we urge that no one is safe until everyone is fed and vaccinated. Human health and food security are indivisible. Food insecurity increases susceptibility to disease, and disease causes us to extract less from the food that we eat. And vaccine efficacy among malnourished populations is still not well understood, though there are some instances where that has been proven out that an individual needs to be well nourished in order to get the benefit of the vaccine. Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, has been a partner of a number of the global hunger efforts around the world because they see that connection so important. The lack of social safety nets and limited healthcare infrastructure meant that COVID-19 impacts were most severe on economies of developing nations. So here in the United States, we have robust social safety net systems, whether it's SNAP, WIC, farm boxes. Most of those types of programs do not exist in developing countries. So the World Food Program was approached by more than 50 country governments to help put these kinds of systems in place during the early stages of the pandemic. One of the things that the World Food Program does in that instance, though, is to try and complement the existing government structures, not to replace them. Another place where we saw shocks, and this was most evident early on, but we're all still seeing the impact of this, was in supply chain. Things literally shut down. Border crossings that typically took 1 to 2 days, I'm thinking specifically in continental Africa, we're now taking 1 to 2 weeks. And you can imagine if you had perishable food that you were trying to get across a border, what that delay meant as far as food waste and loss. It was a tremendous challenge. And of course, we're still seeing the delayed impacts of all of these supply chain shocks through the increase in food prices. And WFP's partner in the UN system, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, is showing global food prices on its index at levels not seen since 2011.
5 minutes.
Global hunger today is overwhelmingly the product of compounding interrelated shocks. Like I mentioned earlier, hunger trends have been moving in the wrong direction for the last half decade, both for chronic hunger and acute hunger. Today, hunger is driven by a toxic blend of conflict, climate change, and COVID-19. With respect to conflict, we're seeing levels of conflict not seen since the end of the Cold War. If you think about Yemen, Syria, Ethiopia, and the role of non-state actors has increased tremendously, making conflicts more intractable. Climate-related extreme events that were occurring at the rate of 90 a year in the 1990s are now exceeding 200 a year. This is tropical storms, heat waves, flooding, and drought. So I'll give you an example in Madagascar. Some of you might have been following the news on this. Climate impacts have joined conflict. Skip that note. In Madagascar, more than 1 million people are suffering for hunger, predominantly in the southern part of the country. Nearly 14,000 of them are in famine-like condition, and that's expected to double by the end of the year. Amid the hottest decade on record, Madagascar has seen deficits of rainfall. Crops have failed year after year, leaving families depleted without any means to feed themselves. The humanitarian community is increasingly concerned that situations like this will become the new normal. Madagascar is extreme too, in that it's an island, and so it's very difficult to get things there and even to transport them across places. It can take 2 to 3 days to get something from the capital city to the southern region. So COVID-19 places an even greater stress on families and individuals suffering from conflict or climate-related hunger. And Afghanistan is a perfect example of this. Between climate, conflict, and the repercussions of conflict and COVID, it's been a perfect storm, and half the country may face famine-like conditions this winter. So this is CRISPR-Con. I'm talking about global hunger. I'm talking about conflict and climate and COVID-19 and the number of people that are in need of food around the world and the reasons why. So CRISPR fits into this because to address these needs both now and in the future, we need every tool in our toolbox. And I see this across 3 different categories. The first one, obviously, is production. It's vital that we have tools to increase production and yield, and particularly to adapt to climate changes. Increasing food for people and planet alike that is nutrient dense and available to access. Second one, food waste. I mentioned earlier the incidents with the border crossings. This isn't just an issue in a time of crisis. This is something that we want to address long term. If you can extend the life of fresh fruits and vegetables another couple of days or even a couple of weeks, that makes it that much further that you can go to get that in the hands of folks who need it the most. And then finally, while not directly related to food, vaccine development. Faster vaccine development and production and getting it in folks' arms or mouths means faster return to economies. So I mentioned urban hunger spiked as shutdowns rippled across the globe. And in the future, if we can address those health needs more quickly, it will allow us to mitigate the impact on livelihoods and ultimately on food security. So thank you for inviting me to be here with you today. I look forward to hearing from the other speakers and again, appreciate your time.